Now for the part you've all been waiting for. We're going to finish with Tzitz Eliezer. We saw the limit of that which that fellow brought to me. He wanted me to address. So we're not going to talk about anything more. We could open up more tshuva of the Tzitz Eliezer to see more arguments, but we haven't been asked to address those. We did see that the final argument that was addressed was based on misinformation that was provided to the Tzitz Eliezer. Like I said, he was basing his argument on information that he had received. Okay? Now, if you have someone who is a guardian of the party line, let's say a person who has a rabbinic position, despite his disqualification personally, but that's once again, for better or for worse, that's what his job is. And he's supposed to guard the Haredi party line. It is sufficient for him for these points to be in a book written by a major posek. Okay, what it says here in the Tzitz Eliezer says that there's much to doubt concerning from archaeology itself concerning the location of the Temple Mount and where exactly the walls are supposed to be, etc. It's good enough it's in a book, and it now carries great, impeccable halachic weight. Rav Shechter made a joke about this. Remember what Rav Shechter said about smoking? Is it forbidden to smoke? His response was yes. Now, well, are you sure? Is that really the truth? So Rav Shechter said, write it in a book and shoot me. Why should I write in a book and shoot you? He says, because the second it's written in a book in the name of someone who's passed away, so now it's part of the canon. Now it's a real something. So that's the problem with these types of arguments, that the Temple Mount walls were actually perhaps far to the east and to the south of where they are now, which is basically a physical impossibility. The second that's already in the book, so now it's for this fellow who is trying to argue this, that should be good enough. It should be good enough for you. It should be good enough for me. And it's almost not subject to argument. We also saw that argument that he gave, which is he's not the first one, about you think you're so holy, you want to go pray in the Temple Mount. Are you worthy of doing such a thing? And take such a risk. Remember, we saw that even in the Medrash says they made arguments against speaking Hebrew, wearing tefillin, and living in the land of Israel. Who says you're holy enough to speak Hebrew all the time? What is it? Yuhara. It's some sort of arrogance. Are you holy enough to live in the land of Israel? The Vilna Gaon didn't make it here, so why do you think you could make it here? And you know what the argument against that is? It's Adarabah. On the contrary, God wants us to speak Hebrew and live here and wear tefillin all day, not because maybe we don't live up to those standards, but because they push us to live up to the proper standards. It's not that you have to sanctify yourself and then you'll finally, maybe towards the end of your life, you'll deserve to speak Hebrew. No, Hebrew refines you. Maybe not one day you'll have the merit to live in Israel if you keep enough mitzvahs. Living in the land gives you the privilege of becoming a better person. Same thing with wearing tefillin. You know who realized this recently? He didn't say it in these words, but he came to this realization. The secular professor Gadi Taub, who sort of had a realization, a reawakening. He's become a lot more vocal. Okay? So he was talking about how, yes, I go to shul. I would daven on Yom Kippur with the people. I went to the full Yom Kippur davening. Or when we say praxis, then belief. Okay? First, going along with it. By the way, this is basically what the halacha demands. The Rambam and others are saying, yes, you got to follow all the rules. You got to make sure to go to the synagogue and pray with the minyan, even if you don't really comprehend God right away. Which is kind of funny. I think that really intelligent Jews like Einstein and Gadi Taub actually were too agnostic in this approach. Most people of lower intellectual power have emunah pshuta. They do what they do as Jews, and they love God. But their conception of God is probably very immature, especially with regards to reward and punishment, how they understand mitzvah points and averas and things like that. And God's justice is probably very primitive or very immature, and would make the Rishonim very upset if they would describe how they believe this works. But they believe in God. Whereas if you have someone who's very smart and he's trying to keep all the mitzvahs, but he has a doubt exactly about the nature of God, so he's gotten a lot farther than the rest of them. But because he's too smart, and he realizes that there's all these deep ideas about, let's say, reward and punishment, and the nature of God's omniscience and omnipotence and omnipresence, that they say like, yeah, but I just don't understand. I don't believe enough in God because they're struggling with these very deep ideas, but they're probably way ahead of us. So like I said, first praxis, then belief. That's very important. First get along with it. Bitoch shelo lishma, Chazal said. First, you're doing it for not necessarily the right reasons or for the purest intention, but you'll eventually come to the right intention. First, get used to doing the mitzvahs. Okay, that's good. Now, we finished that with the Tzitz Eliezer. Here's the kicker. Well, or not the kicker. We're building up to it. I mentioned my Korean edition of Sefer Avoda. These were very good. For a while, they're giving this out for free. Where can you get them for free? You see them at the bus station. They wanted everybody to do Rambam Yomi. And you could also buy it if you want to, if you believe that it's worth investing in Torah books. Perhaps it's even a mitzvah to do so. I believe so. So we bought a few of these. I got a few for free, and I try to, keep the set. And you should get yourself a Shas and a Shulchan Aruch, and of course lots of different Rambams because there's all different ones there, and that's so funny. There's one Shulchan Aruch. You get yourself one, either the Friedman edition or the other one of Shulchan Aruch. They're all basically good. I like the Friedman more because it's easier to read the Be'er HaGra. So it has some advantages. So you get yourself a Friedman, Shulchan Aruch, and a tour. So you're set. But there are so many different Rambams, and each one has what to offer. You got to get yourself a Frankel, and the Rav Kapach, and the Yad Pshuta, and the Makbili, and the Korean, and a few others, and the one that they have online, because there's a lot more. You can buy that one. Once you have a tour with everything in it, so you have it. So at least in the appendix to this edition, which I had, they actually talk about Aliyah Lahar Abayas B'Yameinu, going up to the Temple Mount in our times. And I color-coded it, different arguments for or against, here in the text. So I use highlighters or colored pencils. I find highlighters ruin the paper, and they soak through. But colored pencils or crayons get the same highlighting effect, and they're not as messy. So it's a little bit hard to use, but I prefer that. That's why I keep with me. To each his own. He wrote, for example, here, Yeshos Rim Mikol V'Chol. There's some who prohibited outright. Some permit ascending in purity to certain sections of the Temple Mount. Then he goes into introduction. So I was going to review the different arguments over here, and we'll just see Rashi Prakim here, and then we'll see what Makbili responded to this, and then we'll get to I hope what would be the surprise ending. Okay. Ulam gam la'achar shenifzaka halacha ki kedushat ha'arba'im v'mikdash kayemet gam la'achar churban. First, they went into the whole issue. The Temple Mount still in its sanctity. The general one, the main argument, the Rambam and the Ravad. Rambam says Temple Mount is just as Temple Mount as it always was. The sanctity exists, and therefore all the different prohibitions to entering exist still until today. And there's what to be said. Perhaps if the Ravad is correct, the Temple Mount has lost its sanctity. Maybe there's more room for leniency in permitting things. Although we also saw the major argument. Even if the Ravad were correct, you're still not allowed to go there. Okay, whatever it is. Truthful point, the prohibition is not equal on every part of Harabais. There's different parts of Harabais. He continues, B'sikum, Mina Torah, Asur B'Isur, Karet L'Tamei, L'Tamei Meit L'Kanes, L'Kom L'Kdash, Mina Zara Liftim. According to the Torah, it is prohibited for a person contaminated with death and purity to enter the place of the temple from the Azara and within. The Azara is a very limited part of the Temple Mount. It's mostly also on that raised platform where they won't let you go. Although we got as close as we could the other day, but still, yeah, there were a lot of suspicious characters around there. I alerted the police to their presence. Okay, there was a police captain there, and I was able to show him that there were many terror suspects and potential murderers roaming the Temple Mount, and I pointed them out very clearly, and they were photographed and everything. So I hope the police have done, taken the appropriate steps against these potential dangers. Why am I saying potential? That's the wrong word. Well, against all these dangers. And then it says, Ubi de Rabbanan af me'achel v'hala. And according to biblical rabbinic law, from the chel and within. So that's a little bit farther out. Fine. Everywhere else in Harabais beyond these points, the rest of our Harabais, it's only prohibited to someone who is contaminated with some sort of bodily impurity, like Kari, Nida, and Ziva, things like that. We don't have a way to cleanse ourselves of the death impurity, so we can't go into the Azara. But by the way, one point he did not make in this entire uh, essay is, and even the death impurity that keeps us out of the Azara is overridden when it's time to do the Avodah. Basically, every single day we have a korban to offer, which is every single day. There's a tamid. If the majority of the people, or the kohanim, or the kalim, so we check all three boxes, the majority of the people are contaminated with death and purity, then they enter the Azara and they go ahead with the sacrificial service like normal. And they eat Korban Pesach. The difference is all the other sacrifices aren't consumed. So there's menachos that are meant to be eaten, so they can't be eaten. There's sin offerings that are meant to be eaten, they can't be eaten. But the temple service goes ahead. Even on Yom Kippur, the entire Yom Kippur service would be conducted in a state of death and purity if everybody, let's say the Kohen Gadol himself is pure. He's the one who's doing the avodah on Yom Kippur. The majority of the people, or the Kohanim, or the Kalim, have been contaminated with death and purity. That Yom Kippur, they would do the entire Yom Kippur service with the red flag up, or whatever it is. So that's not even preventing us from working on Yom Kippur. So they forgot this essential piece. What are you going to do? He says, "Ulami tumona yotzot min haguf, yitali teher al yedei tefillah kadin." With regards to these tumot, these types of impurity that come out of the body, it is sufficient just to cleanse oneself of those. How does we do it? By the way, through immersion in the mikvah. So you could do that, and you just have to make sure you stay outside the chil. So kudos to the Korean essay for pointing this out in the first section. And then it says, try to find the place of the temple. There's a principle in halacha that one cannot just doubt on positive tradition. If the Rabbis and everybody's to tell you this is where the Holy of Holies was, and by the way, the Muslims got this tradition from us, and that's when they put their shrine over that thing, you can't just go and say, well, how do you know? That's not a halachic way of casting doubt. If you want to cast it out, if someone says he has a yichus or something like that, or at least his kosher lineage, you can't go and say, well, maybe you're a mobster. By the way, someone does that. Anybody who starts casting doubt when there's no proof otherwise, something that has a chazak already of something, is considered a Baal Lashon Hara. The Chazal also said if you have to choose between someone who's telling you, I'm certain of something, and the other guy's like, well, I don't know, maybe. Bari Veshema, what's the rule? Bari Adif. Bari wins. Certainty wins. It says here, Ki af lachar churban hishtamra masort mitzufa alodot mekol mikdash betoch harbayit. Since the destruction, or despite the destruction, we've already preserved a tradition of where the temple edifice stood on the Temple Mount. And by the way, just going there, you can see it. There is no place higher on the Temple Mount than the area of the Dome of the Rock. And within the Dome of the rock itself is higher than the rest of the floor. Just as described in the Maseches Midos, that's the highest point. There's no other way you could, let's say, there was a big theory out there to shift the entire temple, the outlay of the temple, on the Temple Mount, but more to the north. The problem? There's no place with topography that matches what's described as a temple. If you were just looking at a 2D map of the temple, from a bird's eye view, maybe you could do such a thing, but you can't do that in 3D. He continues, BP Rabbi Avram Bar Chia Hanasi. This is someone who lived in the 12th century. Uvabitur Ketzad Bichurban Habayit Vahala Hit Afshra Aliyah Harbayit Vafe Hasham Beit Tfilah Midrash. Times after destruction, there was still a synagogue, a place where people could study and pray on Har Bayis. All the dispersed of Israel who were nearby used to ascend to this place, and they would pray there on their holidays. Wow, that's impressive. There used to be a Jewish prayer area on Har Bayis, designated area. By the way, a lot of times we have Beit Knesset. Even in halacha, classically speaking, in Gaonic times and the Gemara times, it wasn't always a building with 4 walls and a roof, right? Sometimes it was an open area. They davened in the fields, or it was a patio type of thing. Just like in the temple itself, there were covered patios, itztabas and satios and stavs, however you vowelize it. Not every synagogue was fully enclosed, and even if it had windows. By the way, you used to have windows. How did they close the windows? They had nice glass panes and all that in older days. Windows sometimes were just open, or they had wooden shutters that when they're open, they're open. When they're closed, they're closed. So the amazing thing that we have glass windows that let in light all the time, yet don't let in the air. basic piece of technology, but that wasn't something that they always had. Okay, so synagogues used to be a lot more open than they used to be. So it wasn't like the type of thing that you and I imagine as a synagogue, but more like a designated place of prayer, perhaps with a mechitza or two, not an eternal mechitza, but mechitzos around it, or perhaps a ceiling. But I would imagine both. Okay, fully enclosed room. Let's continue here. Ad shepashta al abayith ba'et hazoth malchut edom harishah, until in recent times the Malchus Edom, okay, Christian Europe, wicked Christian Europe came. We see it Malchut Yishmael Me'elav, and pushed out the Malchus of Yishmael. We're talking about the Crusades. Crusaders came in and did away with this. Ma'anut Yisrael Palel Babayith. They stopped the Jews from praying there. Af ish echad Yudi eno nimtza b'Yerushalayim b'yamim ha'eleh. Now there are no more Jews left in Jerusalem. The Crusades did a lot of bad things to Jews. Places they passed through, they massacred the Jews. Starting in even parts of Western Europe. People left for the Crusades from France and in England and from Germany. And they, even if, let's say, they weren't necessarily so successful all the time, they did do a good job of destruction along the way. So this is something they did. There were Crusaders who controlled the temple area for a long time. What they call Templars, right? A lot of things that they did there. So yes, they stopped Jews. So he's talking about the first Crusades, and they bring the Rambam, who went to Har Beis Hashem Beregesh. And this is the first time in a long time I actually have a part that's highlighted in red. So there are those who say that the Rambam's intention was describing a synagogue in Jerusalem, okay, and not in Har Bayis. That's the Minchas Yitzchak. That's recent. Why would the Minchas Yitzchak cast down on something that everybody knew the Rambam wrote 1,000 years ago? Because he's trying to argue that you should go to Har Bayis. So of course the Rambam did go daven on Har Bayis. So when the Rambam say Bayis HaGadol V'Kadosh, that daven in Skorban state and God should rebuild it and they'll be able to pray there, he's talking about the great synagogue of Jerusalem, of which there's no historical record. Okay, so it's kind of weird. And this is also, like I said, people who read this Minchas Yitzchak are unaware that the Rambam, when he say I went to the Beis HaMikdash to daven, the Rambam previously, in many different instances in his own books, described all of Har Bayis as the Beis HaMikdash. In other Perushim to the Mishnayos all over the place, unlike Rashi, Rambam refers to at least the city of Jerusalem as the Mikdash. So Rambam was very liberal in this use. But most importantly, Rambam says, go where you're allowed to go and don't go where you're not allowed to go within the Mikdash. So when Rambam went within the Mikdash, he was going where he said he was allowed to go. Just and following the Mishnah, by the way. So there's more over here of the Radbaz bringing his argument. What does the Ramban say? In his Tshuva, he says that Mikuma Mikdash B'toch Harbait V'yitir like Kanes Lo Mikumot Shonim B'atem L'Kfiyato. The Radbaz ascertained based on his knowledge of the exact parts and where it was. He showed people where they could go, He set it up. Hu B'teach et Tshuva V'kovea Ki Hadavar Barur Shetachar HaKibbah Sham Eved Ashtiyah B'li Safek Hanikra Etzlam Al Sakra. Okay. He says, it is undoubtedly that the rock that's under the dome of the rock is the foundation stone that was in the Holy of Holies. And he even says what they call it in Arabic. Uhu mishaweh et kviyato le'ediot u'masorot roachot, which means common testimonies and traditions. Shushama me'agoyim b'nei hamakom. He also heard this from Goyim. Even the Goyim knew this. By the way, there's a reason why the Templars, these Crusaders who showed up in Rashi's time, called themselves Templars because they got to the temple. Goyim, who came from a continent away, British Goyim, who showed up in the land of Israel 1,000 years ago, knew exactly how to get to the temple because it's like right there. There's no unmistakably, when Jerusalem was basically destroyed, there was no walls around the city. There was still the Herodian walls around the Temple Mount, by the way. Okay, Jerusalem is ruins. A few Bedouins here and there, maybe a Jew or two, and some Arabs. So they know exactly where to go to look for the temple because everything is centered around that, even when the land was in its destruction. He also points out, Nitan le'amit et kviyat ha'Rabaz legabei b'kol mikdash b'toch ha'arbait gam al smach idiyot shono kefi sholeh l'mashal be'igeret talmid ha'Ramban. This testimony to one of the Ramban's Talmidim wrote in his letter, Shekatav mikvot siur she'arach b'Yerushalayim ba'u b'sayin v'sham tinpolei domini. Tempole Domini. Domini means our master. Tinpole, the nun is mischalif with the man, means our temple of our Lord. Okay, or Mikdash Hashem, as they say. V'hu aya b'kol mikdash uvana alav Umar bin al-Khattab, ki pagdulav yafeh ad me'od. He's the one, the Muslim ruler who had the Dome of the Rock put there, specifically because that's where the Beis Hamikdash stood. The Muslims had this very good habit. By good, I mean they stuck to it. I don't think it's necessarily good. As long as they're destroying Avodah Zarah, better Islam without any images and things like that. Destroying, I don't know, pagan shrines and Christian things all over the world back in the day, right? They used to have idols in this place, so the Muslims turned it into their holy place, and now there are no more idols. At least there are no more idols, right? Maybe the Kaaba itself is a type of idol, but Muslim mosques don't have idols, which is why you can still technically go to Maras Machpelah, right? There are certain sections that they open up on holidays for the Jews, and it's like a regular synagogue there, right? But other times of year, that room is used as a mosque. Same thing with Kever Shmuel, by the way. Yeah, have you ever been to the Bi Samuel, the grave of Shmuel Navi, beyond Ramot, right? That building is technically a mosque. It was built as a mosque. But Jews daven there all the time. How is that? You can go in there. There are certain hours you can go in there. You can even go into the minaret. I've been there. Why is that not such a bad place to daven? Because there's no idols there. Right? There are no graven images, things like that. So it's not so problematic. If it was a church there, yeah, there's a problem. There's a church over at Kever David. That's a big problem. You got to get rid of that. But what are you going to do? Okay. He continues now arguments against. Achat mitanot hamiknagdim hayta ki hamasorot ha'amamiyot shemezahot et makom even hashtiya taki pasela einan benot samcha mibchira chatit. The Avodah Tama of Nathanson wrote about this. Just because everybody has a folk tradition about where the ark, where the Holy of Holies was, that perhaps is not halachically a tradition. So the question is, what else? What else could it be? Could be? Is there a rival tradition? Is there a tradition other than that? Like, what other traditions can exist? Talking about where a location of a place. Do we have any other traditions of location of places? Yes, the Rambam describes location of Jerusalem, Eretz Yisrael, and the Mizbeach. So I don't know what he's looking here. Hayob lo yadanu b'tziyut even hashtiyah hazot keitzad hi obedet. He wrote today. By the way, this Rabbi Chaim al-Afandri wrote this. Today we don't know what's going on inside the Dome of the Rock. Keitzad hi obedet ki hagoyim pihem diber shav. All we have is reports about what's inside the Dome of the Rock. Maybe the Goyim are lying to us. Well, nowadays we have photographs. You can actually use Google Maps to go into the Dome of the Rock, and many Jews, beheter or beisser, have gone to the Dome of the Rock, and we have photographs and live video. And Goyim mesichim l'tzitubo, they take all sorts of pictures. We know exactly what it's like inside of the Dome of the Rock. So this doubt isn't there. He was wondering, Rabbi Al-Fadri, I'll finish reading this quote over here, and then I'll explain it in more depth. This one says the rock is being suspended in the air. It's well above the ground. Something suspending it, strings? I don't know. He's saying, we're not really sure what's going on inside the Dome of the Rock. Maybe there's nothing in there. Maybe it's not the way it should be. Maybe it's not what Midos describes. Maybe there's no rock, right? Like I said, this argument has no weight now. By the way, which Jews have been in the Dome of the Rock for whatever reason? They more a heter for themselves. I think men like Rabbi Ariel and Rav Lior have told prominent people to enter the Dome of the Rock just to show Jewish presence there. One prominent Orthodox Jew who has gone to the Dome of the Rock and has filmed himself doing so and said it out of this reason, in order to assert Jewish sovereignty, is, you know who? Moshe Feiglin. The day he became a Knesset member, was elected to the Knesset finally, he went into the Dome of the Rock. Apparently he has some Rav who told him to, just to show it's like, I have been appointed deputy speaker of the Knesset, and I'm going here as a member, a representative of the Knesset, just to show, just to stick it. Is that a halachic reason? Okay, now you can argue about that, but he's been in there, and it's been photographed. There is no doubt as to the Dome of the Rock, what's inside of it, and how the rock in there is as we described. So these arguments are no longer, it was nice that they were made, but we no longer consider them. But because these questions regarding the identifying the place of the Mikdash, Pasku Rabim Shasur Lalut Larabait. They said it's forbidden, can't go onto the Temple Mount. L'chach nifsach kama pamim le'orech hadarot achronim, and this has been ruled a number of times in the last few generations. Hey lifnei koma medina v'hen b'yameinu, whether before the establishment of the state of Israel or even today. Harav Kook pasak, Rav Kook, le'asor et aliyah l'Har-Bayit. He said that. We explained why Rav Kook said that, right? Was it the letter of the law or pragmatism? Rav Kook basically told you like the Rambam says, concludes like the Rambam, but pragmatism. By the way, Rav Kook said, when will we start considering going to Har-Bayis? When would be the time? When the Jews are in control. When they have a state that they can do stuff, then we have to, work on something else. Okay, fine. And even Rav Kook said, don't go to Har-Bayis, he suddenly dropped the distinction between different places of Har-Bayis. Right? Suddenly lost all nuance. Very strange. And here's another one. Poskim Rabbi Nosfi Pasku Gam Kein Le'asor Aliyah Har-Bayit V'Ni Mekuzot Bein Hayeter B'Fikpuk Shekayam B'Nogea L'Zihui. They mentioned Tzitz Eliezer once again, and the Minchas Yitzchak. They're not quite sure where it is. Okay, that's called Pikpuk. We know where it is, but they're saying, well, how do you know? Maybe there's a archaeological or something like that. So he says that's also been, the Rabbanut Rashid has taken this position. Better to just not try to discover the facts. Say, okay, we don't know, there's doubts, that's it. But then they have a big section in green. So that should be good. I guess, as opposed to this, there are those who claim it in our days. Shecheker Har-Bayit hitpateach. Research on Har-Bayit has greatly, developed in a good way. Shuv ein makom lefakpek v'daut hazihui. You can't start casting doubt on the identification of these places. V'acher Rav Shlomo Goren arach mechkarim makifim v'hitzbia al gvulot shel makom ha'azarot v'achel ha'asrim b'knisa v'al gvulotim uterim b'vadaut. Rav Goren did a lot of research on this. He was actually there. He walked around in Har-Bayis. He advocated for the destruction of the shrines there and the rebuilding of the temple. He was the one who actually had a plan, tried to bring a bulldozer. Let's get going with this. He knew where everything is. He found where the chel is. He knows where to go. He also dedicated a few chapters to this in his book. What's it called? Har-Bayis. I recommend reading it. And so too other rabbis and researchers. Also, Rav Kook's psak was before they actually had any real deep research into the matter, and background, and actual familiarity with the Metzias. They had no information, but nowadays they do. Since the 6-Day War, now, if the Jews had wanted, they could have all the smart people who know these things come to real conclusions just by actually going there and checking it out. And even our limited ways of, even now, you can see it. The evidence is there. He wrote this in the year 2016. Nowadays, there are rabbis who completely permitted it because we have all the information, as long as you purify yourself. And he has a number of sources here, although I'm told here the letter from Rabbi Ra'anan, who was Rav Kook's grandson, Rav Kook's son-in-law, and a member of the staff at Merkaz Rav, was the first Rabbi Ra'anan. And his son was a well-known Merkazdik rabbi who was murdered in Hebron like 30 years ago. And his son is the very modest Rabbi Ra'anan, who refuses the title rabbi, even though he knows Shas cold. Okay? Very, very, very nice fellow. And Rabbi casts this letter in, he says it's not his father's handwriting at all. It looks like it's just a piece of paper, his opinion about going to Har-Bayis. It's featured prominently in the end of Rav Wolfson's first sefer about going to Har-Bayis, Har-Bayis Ka'alacha. But if Rebbe challenges that, he says not his dad's writing. Okay, so that's one source that's, I guess, a legitimate challenge to it. It also doesn't make sense that someone in these circles would actually be permitting going to Har-Bayis. Usually Merkazdiks, and especially Rav Tau's crowd, What are they? They're against it, right? They're just sticking to it. That's what we didn't do. The Geula ended with the Kavas Medina, no moving forward. Okay, so what he says also, Ki mishum shebemeshech harbei durot lo shamru al dinei Torah milvad Torah hanida levala. One of the hard things about doing this Torah business is we haven't been keeping these halachas for, I don't know, a few thousand years. Oh, hi, Yosef. How you doing? Oh, okay. So you're with us. Yeah. It's kind of slow night here. Okay. So uh, people that haven't been keeping these halachas, the only people who really go to a mikvah with any purpose and try to purify themselves for a serious reason are women in order to engage in relations. However, everybody else hasn't. Kayom einenu bikim b'shmirat Torah al dineha v'diktukeha hashonim. Nowadays, we're not used to keeping laws of Tumat Torah. We just don't. We don't know all the intricacies, all the nuances. No one studied Sefer Torah. Ve'eli kanes b'isur shehu safek karet b'makom she'ein b'kach tzorech. Okay? So the Minchas Yitzchak argued you shouldn't go even try to go to these places if you have no need. So I added my own 4 exclamation points at that point. If you have no need in parentheses, why am I shocked by him writing such a thing? Because there is a necessity to go to Arabias. We have a need. We need to start keeping the commandments of building the temple and everything sacrificial. It's 2 orders of the Talmud. It's 1/3 of the Talmud basically is about this. And we have a national need to do this. Am Yisrael needs to have a temple. Am Yisrael needs to connect to God. Am Yisrael is commanded to do so. There isn't Sorech. Oh boy. That reminded me of people told me don't need to make aliyah because there is no need. The Torah, does the Rambam consider it a mitzvah? Does the Rambam actually paskins you're allowed to live anywhere you want in the world? So do you need to live in Eretz Yisrael? So why even bother? Why did Jews have to risk their lives and wars and do all these things for something for which there is no need? And what's the answer? There is a need. The most basic rule of Judaism. God chose Abraham, what? To make him his own chosen nation and told him to go to the land of Israel. Without the land of Israel, we have no commandments. We have nothing. So too, without the Beis Hamikdash, we're dead. Okay? The Vilna Gaon compared it. This is the time before Tchias HaMesim. Tchias HaMesim also exists on the national level. It's a metaphor for a person. He says the destruction of the temple was a man was killed. Now he's dead. He's a corpse sitting there. He's still warm. He still looks like a living person, right? So, the stage right before Tchias HaMesim is like Yechezkel Navi saw. The body goes from a state of disintegration to integration. It's rebuilt. It's fresh. It just needs to be animated. Just needs to be given its soul back. That would be the rebuilding of the temple, the end of the resurrection on a national level. So that's what we're missing. Am Yisrael is completely there, just the soul is missing. Okay, so it's a problem. So I find this surprising. This type of sock, this type of line is microcosm. Perfectly represents the problem with people's attitude toward going to the temple. What is that? There is no need. Okay? Yeah, that's incredible. Beidach, on the other hand, Hamatirim Tanu, Kinitan Lagia Lidia Chatit Pura, Bedine Taras, Kefishanagi, Bedine Taras Nida. They said, just like people know how to keep the laws of Nida, and couples are not violating Isuri Kares, so too Jews can learn how to keep the other laws of Tum and Tara. There's Shulchan Aruch on Hilchos Nida, right? You can learn how to go to mikveh. You can learn what not to touch. You can learn what to do if you get contaminated. This is something we can do. The Torah wasn't given to Malachi Asharis. For thousands of years, Jewish people kept these halachas. They're there for our self-improvement. We can do it. The Tanatam, Im Tudhag Aliyah Har Bayit B'Kerev Yudim Yirei Shamayim. If this ascending the Temple Mount becomes a practice of Jews who fear heaven, what's going to happen? Tivatzer Muda'ut Hilchatit Gam B'Kerev Ha'amod L'Halachot Hanogaot L'Ufan Haliyah Kadim. So we'll start to generate public knowledge of these halachas. Public interest, public inquiry, public knowledge. People will start to learn about this more. By the way, Lama Davar Domeh, were the Jewish people keeping Shemitah for a while? I don't know, for a few centuries in Golis? No. And nowadays, every time Shemitah rolls around, so everybody is becoming everybody's has his own opinion about it. Oh, I don't trust Heter Mechira. I don't need that. I hope of this. It's like everybody has their own laws of Eruvin, right? Everything comes up once a week. I check the calendar. Tomorrow night is Shabbos again, so everybody knows how to keep their own Shabbos. Oh, I hold of this. I don't. I make tea. I make my tea in a kli shlishi. Okay? I know what I'm doing. No, I don't even do that. Okay, so everybody's is his own Rav with regards to Hilchos Shabbos. Thank God. And that's going to happen soon also. People are going to keep the halachas, and they'll know, like, I'm not going to sit on that chair. That guy sat on that chair. Why? I think he's a Zav. Okay, so I don't want to get his contamination. Now, wait till people start doing that. There are people who say, we saw that 2 weeks ago, maybe you're a Zav. Okay, well, if he's a Zav, so you don't want to sit on the chair he was sitting on, right? It'll contaminate you also. So, people are going to start, learning these things, and it's going to become part of the conversation. Thank God. It's a good thing. Jews have conversations. That's what Talmud is about. We take the line that's supposed to be the mission that's supposed to be at least indisputable, and even there, lines of the mission are themselves disputes between Tanaim, and then we're going to start arguing about everything in between the lines. Okay. Also, Shebekach Mekayimim Mitzvot Yishuv Haaretz V'Chibusha. Going to our bias, you are also fulfilling the commandment of what? Conquering the land, settling the land. Between Chibal Hashem Ul Mikdasho. This also is an expression of love for God and His temple. Between Lavilut al Churban Habayit, also a way to express mourning for the destruction of the temple. Those who go up to our bias are actually reducing the Chil Hashem. What's the Chil Hashem? The presence, the very presence of God's enemies on the temple. Who are God's enemies, by the way? How do you define God's enemies? 2 ways. If there are no Jews around, it's just the people who are sinning. Okay, the Rishayim who worship idols, okay, or the people who deny God. Those are Rishayim. And if you're dealing with Jewish people, the people who are the enemies of the Jewish people, they are the enemies of God. God's enemies are Israel's enemies. So yeah, we're dealing with them. And he concludes, though, because the Korain basically gave all these good arguments for going to Har Bayis, they didn't want to get in trouble back then, so they have to conclude with something in red. They say that Tigrom la lot ar betuma the lo tvila bafi katsu l'shitchei azrut v'achel v'kashlu b'yisurei Torah v'charet. If we allow people to go to our bias, too many people are going to go there in the wrong way, and that is a sin. They're going to go there impure. They're going to walk around the Azara. Shouldn't be allowed. The Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote, interesting that it chose to end with his words, Etzem ha'alat she'elat heter haliyah lahar al seder hayom. Okay, the very question that we're going to start asking this question. This is why I think this is an excellent conclusion, a good segue to what we have to say here. The very question that should we be going to Har Bayis is the fact that that's on the agenda today. In a reality where most of the Jewish community do not keep the Torah and the commandments, and it doesn't keep any of the halachic instructions that are supposed to be there, it's going to cause a lot of people to go into the forbidden areas. Instead, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said everybody should start learning the halachas, studying the laws of building the Beis HaMikdash. And then it will be considered as though what? It's as though he participated, but it's only as though he participated, which is why they put, some editions have the askamas at the beginning of these books. So you have one from Rabbi Rav Rabinovich, and a Chabad rabbi over here. And then they have in the Makbili other ones, the Lubavitcher Rebbe telling people to learn what? Rambam every single day. So they conclude with this one. It's better to just learn about it. But the problem is, perhaps, maybe there is what we're supposed to do. But more importantly, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, this is alarming, basically, that this is even a question that go to Har Bayis. How can you even, his assumption is we should be staying away and just waiting for Mashiach. Maybe he was talking about himself. But that's kind of funny because I think that this and the Makbili one, which is obviously even more in favor, which is similar, but we're not going to look at it right now. I think that this is actually the exact opposite. What do I mean by that? Lubavitcher Rebbe said, just asking this question is not the right thing. This shouldn't be on the agenda. And I say, no, it is not. Why? Because really, we have this cognitive dissonance. We should never have asked this question going up our bias. You know why? Because the Torah intended for us to keep these halachas. Let's go back to the Meraglim. What was the fundamental mistake there? Their job was to report to Moshe Rabbeinu about how good the land was. And perhaps because they're leaders, they're leaders of their people, they're supposed to give advice about how to go about conquering the land. Maybe recommend to their tribes which parts of land they would like more than others. Their job was not to discuss if to go to the land of Israel. Their job was to tell us how. Not even why. Their job was to tell us how. But instead, they took upon themselves the if, and they answered in the negative. So the problem, the very problem with this essay in the appendix to this Rambam, and even the one in the Makbili is, they're asking a question, is this permissible or not? What would Rashi say? What would the Rambam say? Rambam wrote you a book about how you were supposed to go up to Har Bayis and how he did it, and as a people you're supposed to go and build a temple and offer sacrifice. And you have the chutzpah to then go and say, should we be doing this at all? Of course you should be doing this. It's like, should I go to the land of Israel? That's what you're supposed to do all along. So we have other, I say, call this nonsense questions. It's not that we shouldn't have brought this up on the agenda, and Oigevalt, this is on the agenda, it shouldn't have been the agenda. No, the very idea that you shouldn't go to Har Bayis was on the agenda, was a question. That was totally wrong. What Tzitz Eliezer himself was addressing was wrong. That Tzitz Eliezer, as the posek, was supposed to say, here is how I feel we should have my plan for teaching Am Yisrael the laws of Tumah Tara, and then a way to actively rebuild the temple and get the sacrificial service going again. That is what his job was supposed to be. What is this like? We see a question. Is it permissible to settle the land of Israel? So people ask that question. But what are you talking about? The Torah demands that we do so. It's a prerequisite for keeping all the commandments. What about the commandments to keep a temple? Should we try to look for a way to offer korbanos nowadays? What do you mean try? You have a commandment. You're obligated to do so. What other ones? So nowadays, people already comprehend that, of course, settling the land was obligatory all along. That argument disappeared. And we already saw that when a Navi tells you something, it's less about telling you what's going to be in the future, more about a commandment. You have to make it happen. So Zionists, people who keep, let's say, Yom HaAtzmaut and understand the events of the 20th century, got these points very well. We were supposed to settle the land of Israel all along, and we were supposed to make the words of the prophets come true. But they forgot that it's the same regarding the temple. If the prophets tell us the temple will be standing and everybody will worship God there, then it is not our job to sit back and wait for it to happen. It is our job to make it happen. So we focus too much on halacha. Another thing, question is, a lot of times, minutiae of halacha, what's the ikar? How do we serve Hashem? Midos, right? Try to love God and serve Him and meditate on Him and relate well to our fellow men, right? We're focused too much on Talmud and Talmud law and Orayos, maybe Kabbalah, whatever it might be, studying Tanakh too much, and we're not focusing on our midos. So that's a problem. It's a real problem. This whole idea that Makbili and Korain could open up the books and start saying, well, should you go to Har Bayis or not? It means they didn't even read what the Rambam wrote. The Rambam never questioned such a thing. The Rambam was telling us how to go about doing it. And by the way, it's very interesting. You'd think Torah would be a prerequisite. What's the order of the Rambam's books? Avoda tells you how to build the Beis HaMikdash, and how to run the Beis HaMikdash. And then there's the Korbanos is a section that's, I guess, starts with Korban Pesach, that's once a year, and then it says individual types of Korbanos. There's Shkagos and Bechoros, Me'ila, right? The rest of the Chusari Kapara, the special cases. But then the third book is what? Tara, or Taharoth. Tara, whichever one, however you pronounce it. I thought if the Rambam wanted us to do this right, you know what he would have done? He would have told us first Sefer Tara, first how to be pure, and then Avoda, then Korbanos. But Tara is the last of these three in this section of the Mishnah Torah, even though it's a prerequisite. What's the Rambam trying to tell us here? Well, you look what's in Tara, a lot of it doesn't really come up as not an issue. The first thing he opens with is Paraduma and Tumas Meis, which he already told us is not irrelevant, but we could sidestep that in order to go ahead with the essential construction of the temple and the basic sacrifices. And then he goes into other, I guess, the other chapters in there, Taras and other avos atuma and the mishkav and moshav, right? The other things that come up in there, zavim, etc. So yes, you'll get that. I think what the Rambam was trying to say was first get the temple going, make sure you have the temple up and running, and also learn the halachas as you go along. Don't wait to finish Sefer Torah before building a Beis Hamikdash. By the way, you'll also assume that when you're building, you'll have enough people who can guide the others. Not everybody has to be a genius. Not everybody has to be a posek. As long as you have enough people who can know the basics and teach everybody. Well, know the basics has to know everything backwards and forwards, but they have enough in order to guide everyone else, and then we can get ahead with that. Okay, so because we basically got to the end of this, and I don't know if my nose and my throat will allow me to continue, so we'll stop there. We'll pause for questions. They came into the chat. No, okay, fine. So questions, comments. Tell everybody like, share, and subscribe. Pray for the restoration of the temple, the destruction of our enemies, for the safety of the troops, and hopefully Am Yisrael will wake up. God is screaming right now, right? He's telling us, giving messages every single day, and the question is, are we listening? Yeah, should never have been a question. So Shabbat Shalom, B'nitzachon, and see you next time. Be good.